on recruiting duty, every weak part of your character will come to the surface and it will either consume you or you will rise above it. So true. So true. Um, Second, after your recruiting tour, presuming you don't have any moral scarring, like you can keep your honor clean, um, you will become a better human being in many different environments, many different dimensions. I know that when I got out, I was a better father, I was a better friend, I was a better leader, I was a better Marine, I was a better critical thinker.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. I'm joined today by Chris Kaprielian. He is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. This week, I'm honored to have Chris on the podcast. He has served over 22 years in the Marine Corps as a combat engineer. He talks about his time in service, the mental challenges of recruiting duty, and how he is preparing for his transition out of the Marine Corps through his podcast, the New Mission Career Transition Podcast. I do have a disclaimer for this episode. It is not endorsed by the Marine Corps or the DoD. All of Chris's opinions are his own accord. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you on.
Tab, I am super excited. I've been listening to your podcast. You're natural. The stories are amazing. And as a Marine, clearly I connect with them. So I'm excited and humbled to be on this podcast.
So the first question I always ask, and I'm realizing this may be like my favorite question, but like, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
Yes. In the recruiting world is what we consider propensed. So I have everybody in my grandparents' generation, the men served. I have uncles that served. I have one uncle that served as in 5th Force Reconnaissance. He was the admin clerk, but he still had to go through BRC. He jumped out of a helicopter with a metal typewriter on his back. He's got some like really crazy stories, and some of that inspired me. I'd always had an affinity for military service and those that served. And I had been thinking about it for a while. I was on the college campus at University of California, Davis, and I saw Captain Gregory Clayton, the officer selection officer, with his table set up in the quad. I grabbed a pamphlet and I went to my Cold War studies class. And it was in that class that I was at a crossroads because I wasn't paying attention. I was doing well in the class. I wasn't even paying attention to the lecture. I was just staring at this handout, and it had a picture of a Marine with an M16 and a 203 underneath it, pop in the left, which, the follow me look. And I was looking at that and I was thinking about what all my friends were doing that were also political science majors. They were either helping somebody campaign for the state legislature, and only if they actually got elected would it lead to probably a job in a congressional office, or they were studying for their LSATs. Let me tell you, bleh, like was not interested at all in going back to school. And so I saw this pamphlet and I'm like, all right, I've been thinking about it for a while. I took it, went back to the quad, saw Captain Greg Clayton, and I said, all right, so how do I sign up for this thing? And that's how it started.
And how'd your family, like at what point did you tell your family and how did they feel about it?
Oh, dad was supportive, mom was supportive, but moms are moms, like, oh my baby. And this is in a time when we were in a state of war, there were Marines deployed. And so, certainly the family was nervous, but they were also very proud. So I was very lucky that my mom and my dad supported me.
And we've had a few officers on the podcast, quite a few Mustangs, I guess more Mustangs
Mm.
than I'm realizing now than officers. So can you kind of like briefly explain what the process is as an officer compared to enlisted when it's like, yeah, I want to become a Marine? How did that process look for you? Because there's a number of different ways, and we don't have to go into like all the numbers of different ways, but which way did you end up?
Yeah, no,
joining?
that's a great question. Certainly, there are two, broadly speaking, two methods. You can either be promoted from within, in which we find enlisted Marines that meet the basic qualifications to continue their schooling, get their degree, attend officer candidate school, and then go to the basic school, which are the two principal schools that all officers go to, with the exception of those that get accepted to the Naval Academy. They don't go to OCS, um, but they endure 4 years at the academy and then they go to the basic school. I didn't have any military experience prior to then. I wasn't prior enlisted, but I entered in something called the platoon leaders class. At the time, it was PLC combined, which meant that there were two options. You could do 6 weeks in between your sophomore and junior year, and then go back 6 weeks between your junior and senior year in college. Or you could do what I did, which was 10 weeks combined between your junior and senior year. And so when I went to officer candidate school, they screen and assess individuals to see if they're of the right mental, moral, and physical character to be able to serve as an officer. But what that really means is they're trying to get you to quit, right? There is some assessment. And I will tell you that in my own class, there were Mustangs. There were prior enlisted Marines. I think they had some broken time and they came back into the officer program. And they were a couple of so just from that experience alone, I knew nothing. I looked at the prior enlisted who there were several of them that just got us locked on. And it was about just enduring 10 weeks. And then there were some prior enlisted that didn't realize it's a PT academy. I mean, if you don't get physically prepared, you're going to break. And frankly, at the end of 10 weeks, a lot of us were broken. I mean, I couldn't feel my toes. We had other guys that had stress fractures. Individuals were fighting through pneumonia in the last couple of weeks. But I mean, that's what it is, and so those are kind of the entry pipelines, generally speaking. And that's the pipeline. I did 10 weeks, graduated from OCS after my junior year, went into my senior year, kind of was semi like a poolee. I was in contact with my OSO for my senior year, got my degree, finished my grades, did temp admin work until my number came. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
transcribing things. It was just I was doing it at Snap-on Tools, great company. But my number came up for the basic school, and then I went to the basic school, and that was 6 months of learning how to be a provisional rifle platoon commander and a Marine Corps officer.
And what were some of the challenges? Did you find personally more challenges in OCS or TBS? What seemed and it could be emotionally, which one do you
Mm.
think you felt like you overall maybe had more challenges with?
OCS. I mean, I wasn't used to people yelling at me. I'm sure it's the same thing for everybody that goes the enlisted route and they go to boot
Yeah.
camp. But there was a point in time where I remember I had a horrible night. I felt like quitting. I felt like requesting to drop. And I just gave myself, it was a good lesson. I gave myself the night. I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning and it's like a switch clicked on. And that wasn't just me that happened to. There were quite a few individuals that happened to as well. At some point in time, they hit the wall and they make it across the wall. And it was about not quitting. Even when you want to, it was about not quitting. And there were maybe a couple of times in my career where I remembered this is what it's like to hit the wall. Don't quit. It was a great life lesson.
And I was actually going to ask if you felt like that, you kind of had that trend of having that moment of give myself the night throughout your time in the Marine Corps.
Oh, 100%. It's just amazing what a good night of sleep can do to refresh you the next day and give you an alternative perspective. So, um, yeah, a night of sleep. By the way, in a sleep deprived environment like that, a night of
Yes,
sleep is huge.
for certain. Now, when you joined, did you know what you wanted to do as a Marine, or was it just, I want to be a Marine Corps officer?
No, I wanted to be a Marine Corps officer. I didn't, and honestly, I didn't really know. I didn't listen, I was like this Neanderthal, like 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid. I saw the dude with the rifle and the 203. I didn't know it was a 203 grenade launcher. I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. And for the most part, you kind of get a dose of it at OCS and you get a heavier dose of it at the basic school. And it wasn't until I was at the basic school that I learned more about what it meant to be a combat engineer officer. And I was like, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to do kind of the stuff the grunts do. I just don't want to hump.
Fair.
Yeah. I'm 5 foot, gosh, I'm 5'7", but then I was in my peak running form and I was weighing only like 140, 143 pounds. So like putting that 70-pound ruck on me, I could do it, but I was not doing it as well as many others were. So yeah,
Fair, fair.
yeah.
Do you feel like you made the right decision? And I know you're still in. I guess I should have prefaced that in the beginning.
Uh,
But you are still in the Marine Corps. So like, do you feel like you made the right choice into like what job or like felt that it was the right fit for you?
yes, yes. I think there are other occupations I could have done and performed well and enjoyed, but in retrospect, it's not exactly, I didn't have a good understanding of what the entire career path would look like as a combat engineer officer, but I like what it was. And I think at this point in time, like I'm 21 years in and I'm still on active duty. And I just signed my Appendix J yesterday. Yeah. I requested a date of 1 June 2025. And it's been there was a lot of reflection that went into that before I signed it. Um, I didn't know understand what it was, but I really like how it turned out because I had so much exposure to so many things other than engineering. And I like to consider myself a very well-rounded logistician of an engineer flavor, if that makes sense.
I like that of an engineer flavor.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the way it is. I mean, if I were to counsel or advise anybody that's a lieutenant or a captain that's a 1302 combat engineer officer, I would be like, your job as a captain is to be the very best leader and combat engineer officer you can be. Once you put pin on like field grade rank, it's a different world. Now you need to be a MAGTF officer and you need to understand as many aspects of logistics as you possibly can because you're going to be put into roles that really, quite frankly, are going to need that more than your engineer expertise. And so, and I've lived by that, and I think it's paid off. And yeah, but I like how it turned out.
And what in your career kind of like drove you to that, like defining like this is how it needs to be and this is how I have to be? Was there like a moment, a duty station, or like can you even pinpoint when it's like, okay, this is how I need to be and this is how it needs to be?
Mm, I think it's just through a lot of study and then looking at others. And I've always had kind of an interest in learning from other people. Always being the student. And I found that some of the most amazing officers didn't just come from my cohort of combat engineers, but they came from logistics, they came from aviation, grunts, like people that aren't in the Marine Corps. Like some of the most intelligent people I've ever met are infantry officers, just really well studied, excellent leaders. Um, and so really like understanding that trying not to be a one-trick pony and having a breadth of understanding not only makes you more functional as an officer and a better staff officer, but I think it allows you to be able to speak a language to others in a different type of community and really connect with them. Um, like I don't know how to, I'm not a fires guy. I've never been a JTAC, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express once and I knew enough about creating a fire support plan that when Marines really needed it, I could hand it off to somebody that did speak fires and they're like, okay, well, this isn't quite right, but I get what you need.
Yeah.
And so it paid off. It paid off just kind of pursuing that.
The Oath We Took podcast, hosted by Marine Corps veteran Tab Bartley, tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines who served. While every story is unique, the common bond is the oath they all took. Tune in Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio to catch these engaging conversations. Tab is also supporting the Military Women's Memorial through her Wreaths Across America sponsorship page. For every Veterans Wreath you sponsor at wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took, $5 will go directly to the Military Women's Memorial, the leading memorial and education center honoring the commitment, contributions, and experiences of servicewomen. Once again, to donate, go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/The Oath We Took.
I this is something that I think I need to start asking people because so my recruiter always said to me to never judge the Marine Corps by my first duty station, good or bad. He didn't want that to be my judge. And what I am realizing is that the first duty station or the first like Marine Corps experience has such an impact, whether it's like really good, really bad, like however, and each person takes that and kind of like does it a different way. So can you tell me kind of like how your first duty station was, your first assignment, and how it like molded and impact you?
Oh my gosh, you got me smiling. The So if you're like this guy that went to TBS, wanted to be a combat engineer officer, you go to the basic engineer officer course at Camp Lejeune and the Marine Corps Engineer School, you're playing with demolitions. The place that you want to go to is I want to go to the Combat Engineer Battalion. And I remember we were sitting in the classroom at engineer school and they came out with a list of where we were going to get assigned. And and I'm like, Yuma, Arizona. Is the CEB in Yuma, Arizona? No, it's the air wing. You're going to swing with the wing. And what they told me was, you want to know what Yuma's like? This is what I want you to do. Go find an oven, turn it up to 500 and stick your head in it. So there I am. I'm like, there's a part of me that I'm like, okay, I don't know what I'm getting into. It's not quite what I thought it was going to be. I can't tell you, I can't say it enough. Being at Marine Wing Support Squadron 371 in Yuma, Arizona was probably the best place I could have gone. It was amazing. Everybody that goes to Yuma, they say you cry when you get there and you cry when you leave. 100% true. First, amazing leadership. There are more chief warrant officers in MWSS than there are in other engineer formations. And so getting to learn from the leadership of the squadron, one of whom was who later retired, Lieutenant General John J. Broadmeadow. He was our squadron commander, amazing leader. He had an amazing XO. I learned from them, but I also learned from the chief warrant officers who had kind of like the Mustang experience. They had been sergeants or staff sergeants, and now they were platoon commanders. I learned so much from them. And then just the dynamicism of the types of things that we did supporting a Marine aircraft group in the desert. And then having that experience and then deploying to Iraq, it was like no factor. Like we got used to golfing when it was cheap during the summer in tank tops and flip-flops with other lieutenants. And it was great. And the camaraderie was amazing. And the Mexican food was quite good too. So I couldn't, yeah, there was so much learning that occurred there. And it really kind of, I think, sometimes you get bad luck. Sometimes you get an assignment or you get to a duty station and maybe the leadership isn't where it should be. And it kind of sours the flavor in your mouth and it turns you off to staying in. But sometimes it's what you make of it too. And I was lucky that I had amazing leadership, amazing staff and COs. I can't tell you, Cristobal Pareda, he was my staff and COIC. He was the perfect staff and COIC for a boot lieutenant butter bar because he would close the hatch behind him. He's like, hey, sir, you got to knock this off. And we would have these conversations where it was really developing a partnership. It wasn't superior subordinate. It was like I quickly realized that there's no individual success. It's either we succeed together or we fail together. And this is the sage who I need to be listening to because I learned so much from that staff and COIC on what it meant to be an officer that it kind of set me on the glide slope to do more right than do wrong in the future.
And I think what you said, because like obviously, like, I was enlisted, so knowing that, like, so what's different between the Marine Corps and all the other branches of service is that we have enlisted who train our officers
Hmm.
in OCS. And that's, not the way it is other places. And I think that it has such a dynamic where then you're talking about a situation like this, where, like, yes, you like outrank, right? Like, if we're talking command structure. However, like, there's so much that you can learn from this individual, and it creates that, I think, the ability to, that happens a little more naturally, maybe is what I'm getting at. Do you feel the same way? Like, because you lived it from the actual, like, officer's perspective, is that how it felt for you? Like, a little more natural where you could take that knowledge and embrace it.
100%. I mean, I think the quality of the staff and COs that get assigned as instructors to the officer training pipeline are not only top notch, but they're leading by example. And so it makes you to want to perform better, but it also, you realize that to not associate rank with ability or intelligence, or especially leadership ability. And I can't tell you how many times, even throughout the entirety of my career, even as a recruiting station commanding officer, I learned leadership lessons from sergeants and staff sergeants there. I was like, holy cow, that was amazing. And so I think we have a culture that really promotes that. Um, and I've seen it. Like, you go to a chow hall where there's an Army unit and there's a Marine unit. I mean, I always sat down and broke bread with my staff and COIC and my staff and COs. And in their culture and in the Navy, it's a little bit different. There's an officer's mess, and officers eat with officers and the enlisted eat with enlisted. And so there is this cultural difference that I think um, ends up being tied to our legacy, and it's tied to our mission success. And it's the partnership and how the staff and COs and the officers work together.
And obviously I love the Marine Corps. That's why I have a podcast only interviewing Marines. So fair to say that I think Marines are the best, obviously. But with 22 years in the Marine Corps, obviously there's so many things we could talk about. We can't talk about all the things, sadly. I
Yeah.
can have you back on again. What are some other, and I know we're going to take a deep dive in recruiting, but what were some of the other billets or opportunities you had in the Marine Corps that were very impactful to you, especially like whether it's like your leadership development or even like your career field?
Mm. Yeah, I had an amazing instructor at Expeditionary Warfare School, where they send captains for a year to learn what it means to be a well-rounded Marine Air Ground Task Force officer. And Major Marcus Mines was I think we all had Stockholm syndrome because he pushed us hard, but he had the way of making us want to perform. The things that I learned, um, and then right after that, I got assigned as the operations officer for 9th Engineer Support Battalion. And um, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Baldwin was our CO. He wanted a major to fill the OPSO role, and rightfully, but all he had was me. And I think I wouldn't have done well if I didn't have that education and the tutelage of Major Marcus Mines, and just little things. It's like I found, like I said, engineer officers don't create fire support plans. And we had Marines that were getting hit on road construction projects during that deployment. Um, if I didn't have that education and that training, I wouldn't have known what to do, and it would have caused delays, and it would have caused potentially it could have risked more Marines' lives. So there were things that I learned, and I was able to apply what I learned and see the fruits of my labor. And if I had any success too on that deployment, it was no doubt in part due to the amazing partnership I had with our operations chief, Master Gunnery Sergeant John Kelsch, who was just renowned in the engineer community. Amazing Marine, like amazing leader, amazing operations manager. I mean, just knew his craft. And so those two experiences kind of stand out, being in the training pipeline and then actually getting to apply it in a combat zone. Um, and and for the most part, doing it right. I'm not going to say I didn't make mistakes, but for the most part, doing it right and doing it with amazing Marines that were part of our S3 section.
And with 22 years in the Marine Corps has evolved so much. How was your like mental and emotional health after like your first deployment and your first experience? And has the Marine Corps kind of like changed in that 22 years where you've seen like the return change a little bit, or have you personally made changes as a leader that you've gone through the ranks through those experience when it comes to that?
Mm. Yeah, so for clarity, like I was most of the time on the FOB. I was just assigned to those duties. It was like my second deployment that I was a detachment OIC and was on numerous convoys, but luckily I never got shot at, never got blown up. But I knew Marines that had. And so looking at the evolution of care that was provided to Marines over time was nothing short of remarkable. Um, I mean, seeing Marines recover from extremely traumatic injuries and go out and like throw the baseball with the one real limb at a Giants game when they were a triple amputee. I mean, he shouldn't have lived. But I mean, when you look at the medical care and the evolution of that medical care, and then the care for veterans after they get out, it just continues to get better. Um, not only based on the Marine Corps' efforts, but the DoD's efforts, and also all those organizations that have been nothing but supportive of veterans. Um, in no small part made their contribution to that evolution of care that went to Marines who may have suffered traumatic injuries or even just any injury from their deployment.
And I think that that's a big thing too. And I know that like one of the things like we want to talk about because it's something like we've experienced together, and I have not had a recruiting station CO, but I think
Mm,
that you have experienced such a variety of the Marine Corps. How did your career end up from, being deployed doing these things? Can you kind of explain the career path of an officer and then like going on recruiting duty or like, an additional duty and billets and like how that evolution happens?
sure. So I can speak to my path and
Yes,
some
yours. Sorry, I meant
and,
yours.
no, that's fine. I mean, because generally speaking, there are trends in officer career paths, right? You're gonna graduate from your MOS school after the basic school, and you'll get assigned to a fleet unit. Usually, you'll go to a battalion or a squadron. If you're lucky, you get platoon commander experience. So you get an opportunity to lead a platoon. After that, you might go to you're probably looking at you're either a first lieutenant, you're maybe in zone for captain, and then you go to a second assignment. Now that second assignment could most of the time won't be in the Fleet Marine Forces. It won't be with a deployable unit. Some go to be series commanders at Marine Corps recruit depots. Some go to be OPSOs or EXOs at a recruiting station. Some go other places, right? In my case, I went to Security Force Regiment, uh, and I ended up being their facilities officer. It was a great assignment, great leadership, great exposure. And then after that, you go to career level school. So if you get selected for captain and career designation, which is kind of um, the determination of whether or not somebody's going to be a careerist, um, you have to finish if you want to continue to be competitive for promotion. You need to do career level school. I went to expeditionary warfare school. I was lucky to get selected for the resident program, and then after that, you try and get an assignment in a key billet in a unit that matches your MOS. So I'm an engineer officer. I went to an engineer unit, got an opportunity to be a company commander and a squadron or a battalion operations officer. And near the end of my tour, I got selected to be the staff secretary for the commanding general at 3rd MLG. I would go on runs with General Neil Nelson, and he would melt my brain. Like we would go, he would just like, the man was so intelligent. He'd have my brain spinning at the end of it. Even the G3 would look at me. He's like, "You look like he spun your brain." I'm like, "Yeah, he spun my brain." It was great exposure. And one morning, I'm looking at my email and it says, "Congratulations." I'm like, "Who got promoted? It's not promotion zone time yet." And it's like, "Congratulations, RSCO." And I'm like, "What's this RSCO thing? It's range safety control officer. What is this? Like, will you put it on your wish list, right? What wish list? What are we talking about?" I had no idea. And somehow I got selected for recruiting station commanding officer in Buffalo, New York. I had no idea such a thing existed. I don't know why I didn't know, but I didn't. Pretty naive. And so I ended up doing time on recruiting duty. And so there's, other majors at the time, they might go do another staff assignment at a supporting establishment, or they go to headquarters Marine Corps, make coffee for everybody, because that's what majors do in the Pentagon. I'm just kidding. They do real work, but you're kind of low on the totem pole there. Um, I know so many majors that work their tail off. Uh, yeah, but that was me, and I went on recruiting duty, and I will tell you. So there were two things that ended up becoming true that 8412 career recruiters had told me. The first thing is on recruiting duty, every weak part of your character will come to the surface, and it will either consume you or you will rise above it. So true. So true. Um, Second, after your recruiting tour, presuming you don't have any moral scarring, like you can keep your honor clean, um, you will become a better human being in many different environments, many different dimensions. I know that when I got out, I was a better father, I was a better friend, I was a better leader, I was a better Marine, I was a better critical thinker. Um, yeah, so all those two things ended up becoming very true. Um, and so that was kind of like my major's time. I went to command and staff, ended up after going to command and staff. Usually you're getting close, depending on lieutenant colonel. You might get selected for a battalion. But I got to tell you, I hit another pivotal point too, where I was going through a divorce, and I had a young daughter, and I made the decision to whatever I could do, I would finish my career to provide her financial security and myself. But I would also, putting her first meant not accepting assignments that would keep me geographically separated from her. And so I request to be removed for a lot of battalion command selection. And I'm kind of here today. I'm very happy. I'm at Marine Forces Command, an amazing unit with, God, amazing people. Um, and that's just kind of been my career path. But recruiting duty,
I was about to say, I feel like we're going to spend a chunk of change on
yeah.
recruiting duty because I feel like we know the Marine Corps billboards and that we have the best commercials and all of these things. And I say that because I was also on recruiting duty. And
Mhm.
it's proven we're the best. But there are so many challenges
Mhm.
that I do not think are talked about. I don't think are prepared for or even processed afterwards. Recruiting duty and just the hours alone. How would you compare like the hours you were working on recruiting duty to like some of your other like times in the Marine Corps? Is it even comparable?
No, no, not at all. I mean, I served with RSCOs that had been in combat, like decorated veterans, and they they said it was like that. So I've never, I'm not the guy walking around with the car. I don't have a problem with that. Amazing Marines that have been put in really tight situations, and they said there were elements of it that was comparable. For me, it was the hardest assignment I ever had, and frankly, and I don't think I've ever really talked about this publicly. Um, but as a major, I never thought I would be the type to have suicidal ideation. And one of the reasons, having gone through that, I know for me, it's not something that happens automatically. It's kind of usually at the tail end of a spiral, because I wasn't taking care of myself. I was working, I was working hard. I thought I could work my way out of any problem. That's the wrong way. You can lead ways out of problems, but you can't work yourself out of all the problems. Um, and so I didn't get enough sleep, and then not getting enough sleep made me more tired, and then caused a little bit of anxiety. And the anxiety drove me harder to work, which meant I got less sleep. And then pretty soon my diet was going south. I stopped PTing. And then all these things that kind of the pillars that kind of kept me stable and strong, one by one, started to erode until there were times where, just like at OCS, I felt like quitting, except I felt like quitting on life. And I talked to other RSCOs that who had already gone through that never told anybody, but revealed to me that they had the exact same ideations. And it was through Military One Source. I got connected with, I sought help. I went to Military One Source and got an amazing counselor, older, but the things that she taught me continue to serve me today. And I know I'm a stronger person because of it. I will never get back. I will never go back to ever being in that state again. Um, and so you don't, I'm sure this happens to Marines too that are on recruiting duty. They are under pressure that they've never been under before. They are actually held to metrics in a way that they've never been held to a standard before. And that's across the board. It's not just the canvassing recruiter, it's the RSCOs. And so it's extremely trying. But when you win, like you can show it in the numbers. Like when winning feels great. I don't know if that's because they let you out of the cage from from the punishment or if that's, but I mean it felt like winning. The wins were high, losses were really tough. And it's probably one of the hardest sales jobs in the world. You have to, you're trying to find somebody that's already kind of thinking about military service and sell them on an idea that isn't a widget. It's not something they're going to subscribe to. It is a completely and fundamentally change of lifestyle that you have to explain to them how it's going to pay dividends in the long run.
And there's so many factors too that aren't even in the recruiter's hands. Like you look at, there's certain challenges even just per state or per district or per RS that can be completely different across the nation. You know, we were having challenges in South Carolina that they weren't having in Florida. There were just all of these factors that you can control these few things and all these other things like you don't have control in finding the ways. And I just, I first have to say thank you for being willing to share um, about your experience in your mental health, because I feel like so many of us, especially while we are in, do not talk about it and do not mention it. And I think even more so when, like, who do you have at your command to talk to? I mean, you're the CO. It's not like you can just talk to somebody about that. You know, it's not like
Yeah.
being a sergeant or a staff sergeant where you have these peers that you could potentially like go to or things of that nature. And so I really have to, I don't think commend's the right word, but it's all I can think of right now. But like, thank you for being willing to share that and more so for seeking the help and taking the steps to do that because like that's so powerful. And I feel like so many Marines need to hear that and need to know that.
Yeah. Well, I feel obliged to have to tell it. And I have to plug Sergeant Major Lyle Robinson and Master Gunnery Sergeant Terry Hall, my RI and Sergeant Major near the end of my tour. Like, um, they were no doubt a part of keeping me sane. Like they were because they were in the trenches with me. Uh, and so amazing, again, amazing Marines that I learned from, and I could bounce ideas off of and had the type of relationship with them where if I was saying something and it wasn't the right idea, or it was like they knew it was wrong, like they would tell me, like, because we're all in it to win it, you know, and I don't want to be going down wrong tunnels, but yeah, it's surrounding yourself with, I had to relearn to surround myself with people that I could trust, and go out and ask for help and know where to find it, and then being persistent and committed and not giving up. So, um, I say that all this to say that, you know, I've run across Marines after that experience that I saw were kind of in the same situation. And it was because I had been there, I was able to reach out. Um, you know, you're never going to get the positive affirmation of what you were able to prevent. You can't prove a negative, but I can say in confidence that having gone through that and had other people help me deal with like challenges, that I was in a position where I wanted to return the payment.
And recruiting duty is so interesting too, because I feel like there are so many, like you said, the ups are so up. Like when you guys
Mhm.
are accomplishing things, or even like when you have a really good command climate and earlier you said you learned from so many Marines, like not like rank didn't matter and those things didn't matter. I feel like recruiting duty is one of those environments or commands where it is that. I feel like everybody is constantly learning from everybody, that rank isn't the thing. It's like there's just all these experiences that you're learning from each other. With that, what were some of the wins that you were like really proud of on recruiting duty, or even experiences like educators workshop or EAC events, or like being able to be in front of a community? Because I think that's something that's so unique about recruiting duty too. You're like embedding yourselves in these local communities
Yeah.
in the way you haven't in the rest of like your time in the Marine Corps. It's so like you have to do these things.
Yeah. So if I had a win, it was knowing that I positively helped one of our canvassing recruiters. That's it. Right. I had other fun experiences. There were some fun moments, like wearing your dress blues at a NASCAR event and a crew chief says, "Hey, you want to change a tire?" Like they're in the middle of a race and I'm in my blue whites. Like, "Hey, thank you. No, I appreciate it." That was surreal. But the highs were when I did something and I knew it was only something that I could do um, to help that recruiter or that station commander. So I remember just getting it down, the family nights. So when the substations host the families, and I'm seen as an authority figure by parents. It's the ability to alleviate parents' concerns to a certain degree, and address their questions that would in turn not only help our poolee when they go to boot camp, but also help the recruiter in what they were trying to do from the very beginning during their engagements with the parents as well. Because, we're entrusted with the lives of these young men and women. And frankly, yeah, parents should be concerned about the welfare of their children. So anytime that I could find that, and I was able to get a speech down really well, and then got really good at talking to parents and hearing their concerns and listening. Um, I knew that that made a difference. And so when I walked away from one of those events and I know I got it right, I knew I was helping that recruiter maybe actually have a Sunday and a Saturday where they could relax. Like if I could
And
do that, that's what mattered.
be a part of their family. And yeah.
100%. 100%.
How did you transition back into the Marine Corps from recruiting duty? How was that experience? Because you said you learned a lot from it, but it, like, I'm sure is a different world, because I transitioned right out of the Marine Corps from recruiting duty, but I mean, it kind of has its own culture. It's different little like hub. How was it transitioning back into the Marine Corps?
Oh my goodness. You didn't, yeah. I bet you had a harder time. I will say I went to Marine Corps Command and Staff Resident College, like the in Quantico.
Yeah.
And so it was like 150 other majors. And within that cohort, there were about like 7 of us that just got off of duty as RSCOs. I will tell you, it was like our own like peer therapy session. Like we would just get all the bad stories out of us. It's all we would talk about. We drove everybody else nuts because they hadn't been on recruiting duty. And we were talked about the tough times. And quite honestly, like being a student and not worrying about anybody except for me and doing my studies and helping my conference group, it was a massive relief. It gave me time to kind of recuperate from the stress associated with being an RSCO, and really kind of get me happy again, like really excited about, what the future held. And so, yeah, I will tell you, for me, it was just talking to peers and having that opportunity to do so, just as a form of therapy. Almost it was talk therapy.
I
So
call it word vomiting, like where you just need to get the stuff out, because otherwise it like festers, and it doesn't mean that you have like this emotional attachment to the things you say or anything like that. It's just like this word vomit of, I need to get this out so it's
yeah,
not in me.
yeah, no, 100%. That's exactly what I did.
How I know you've talked on it briefly about like, you've signed and you're now like getting ready to transition out of the Marine Corps, and
Hmm.
you've talked briefly on like why, but can you go a little more in depth, like why, like, 22 years, like you're now made this decision that it's like, okay, your time in the Marine Corps is, it's time for the next thing.
Yeah, I'm a single dad. That's full stop. I mean, that's it. My daughter's my mission, right? I've got other missions and there are other facets to my life. I mean, Um, but I mean that's really what it was. I was lucky to get an assignment in Norfolk, Virginia, when my daughter was living with her mother in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So there was like only one billet, and I actually got it in Norfolk. And I'm able to be the parent that I want to be. I'm able to be the parent that my daughter needs me to be. For 3 years, I commuted between Camp Lejeune and Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's like 3.5 hour drive every other weekend. And I did everything that I could, but she's still in her formative stage, and I want to give her the benefit of having a present father. So everything kind of drove in that direction, and that's my reason. It's not because, it's not really because of anything else. I've really enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps, but it's time for me to go. I've got a great purpose and a great reason. And not only that, but I'm extremely happy about all the other facets of my life. So I can't think of a better time to transition into a different career.
And I can't think of a better reason than like your family, and especially like to be a parent and a father and to be able to like be there and be present. Are there challenges that like as a single father that you've seen in uniform maybe different to like being a single female parent, or is it just being a single parent there are just so many challenges in uniform?
Well, my daughter has the benefit of having a very good mother that takes care of her and meets all of her needs, right? So, um, in that sense, there has been benefit. I mean, like we're both working towards the same end, is raising uh, a young child and maximizing her potential for success, however she chooses to define that in the future, but hopefully still rooted in the moral foundations that we want her to learn. Um, but there ultimately it is that for somebody in this position, uh, who has a very young child, you hit this roadblock, right? Like, to stay in means to accept a PCS or set of PCS orders. It's going to take you geographically away from them, right? And it's not an easy decision. And everybody's circumstances are different. Uh, I would imagine to a certain degree that I don't know whether or not it's harder on single dads or single moms. I just think it's hard. And I think it's just really tough. I've had nothing but great leadership that understood what I was trying to do. I mean, when I had to deploy, I deployed. When I had to go do a field exercise, I did a field exercise. The mission comes first so long as I'm still a Marine. But any other time that I had available, I had amazing leadership that said, yeah, get out of here, get on the road, go see your daughter, you know? And so I was really lucky. And I would like to think a majority of Marines that are in that situation have leadership that looks at it the same way.
I agree. I was always blessed with phenomenal leadership. But my
Mm.
husband and I were dual military and he was Navy. And I
Uh,
remember specifically when we had our first kid, his command was like, well, he's not gonna go to the hospital. And I remember my staff sergeant was like, why? What is he doing? This is his child. Like, you're really gonna have to
yeah.
explain more. And it was just like, I I can't imagine doing this alone, being a single parent and doing this. And I know that there's so many service members who are, and it's just like having that command support is such a huge, like just such a huge thing. And talking about like transition, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. You have your own podcast.
I do.
How did that come about?
Oh. Well, I got here to my last duty station. I knew I was going to be here for 3 years. In 2022, I hired a career coach, Amy Lee Miller, this ball of fire, based in Manhattan, who had years of corporate recruiting experience, and she had her own like career coaching practice. And believe me, I had searched, was very careful about who I wanted to talk to, and it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. It turned out even better. It was the best investment I ever made. She gave me strategy. She taught me, so the plan isn't as important as the planning. So she gave me a way to look at my life, understand what my strengths were, what it was that I wanted, most importantly, to think big, what it meant to be creative, optimizing my schedule. I mean, I even got into yoga, like as a result of that. And it helped actually prevent injury. I'm a big advocate of it for injury prevention, but also meditation. And so she gave me all these tools. And in the course of our coaching, I thought of the idea of the podcast um, as a means of kind of experimenting with the idea of maybe someday being a coach, maybe not necessarily a career coach, but like a wellness coach or an executive coach. And so it was an opportunity to talk to others, understand what their challenges were. And I have a niche, right? I am the guy that's getting ready to transition, and there's a lot of stress associated with. I mean, I've been in the same ecosystem for over 20 years. And I'm going to jump out, right? It's hard on everybody, but I thought, well, what if I could create a mechanism by which I would have opportunities to conduct informational interviews and learn something that would help me, but also simultaneously share that with everybody else that's in my position so
Yeah.
they could benefit from it. And in the process of all of this, becoming a better speaker and picking up new skills. And so it ended up being exactly that. And not only that, but it's fun. Gosh, I get to learn so much from other people. And it's exposed me to so many different perspectives. And most importantly, here's the funny thing. The the Marines that had served like one enlistment or two enlistments taught me the most about the psychological aspects of transitioning. My very first interview, she's amazing. I think she's getting ready to graduate from California State, Sacramento, Sacramento State, Sacramento. You know, and she was telling me about how she felt isolated on the campus. She started her own veterans club. I think she was a co-founder with somebody else, started it back up, and then realized that we're constantly surrounded by Marines. You just need to know where to look. And it's not something, sometimes it may not be as obvious as the Marine Corps League, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it might be the VFW. It might be that one group in a large corporation that has veterans get-togethers. It might be Team Red, White, and Blue. But if you look hard enough, if you're in the fighting hole all alone, you can find somebody that will jump right in there with you. And so, like these things that I've learned on podcasting and talking to others that have transitioned, specifically focusing on that, has been very informative to me, and it's been very enriching.
I absolutely love that. And I feel like this happens every time, but I'm like, I don't know where the time like went. Like this guy, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and would love to have you on again. Especially after you transition and kind of taking a deeper dive into like your experience, especially with all of like the prep work you have done. But before I ask the last question, I want to, give you an opportunity if there's anything that we didn't talk about or have a chance to discuss, that we talk about it before the last question.
Yeah, well, the only thing I would say is for those that are listening to the podcast, I mean, I'm a fan of your podcast, Tab. And I think sometimes sharing the stories is important because it's not just the fact that they're stories, but there are lessons embedded in all those stories that we can all benefit from each other. So this medium by which we share information is extremely valuable. And I'm a consumer of the podcast, so I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that, I will ask the last question, which is if you had to take the oath again, would you?
Yes. Um, I knew you were going to ask this question. I've been thinking about it. How would I answer it? Because I'm not the type of guy that likes the what if questions. Like, what if we go back in time and do it all over again? But um, I am, I have great friends, like friends that I would trust my daughter's life with. I have an amazing girlfriend, Chrissy. She's so talented. And she has an amazing daughter. I have an amazing 8-year-old daughter that I think I've been doing a pretty good job raising her and not alone. And I have to attribute the things that I've learned in my experiences as a Marine officer, have all contributed to creating um, my reality, the world in which I live, and the relationships that I've developed. And so I cannot disconnect those experiences and how they brought me to where I am today, because it's been so enriching. And so I'm very lucky. I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to have my health. I'm lucky to have the people around me. That can change at any moment. But where I am right now, I have to attribute my time in the Marine Corps. And so, yes, I would take the oath again.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Chris's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. His sacrifices matter. His stories matter. Not every Marine's story is the same. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.